In the summer of 1883, federal investigators reached a place known to locals as the Garden of Eden. It was a Christian community in southwestern Kansas, mysteriously abandoned overnight. What they found beneath the flower beds would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Over the course of 11 years, 9 families had vanished without explanation, their leaders insisting they had left for missionary service. But investigators uncovered skeletal remains in mass graves. Their life savings had been stolen. The New Eden Christian community was not a sanctuary. It was a killing field. Before we go further into the story of Prophet Isaiah Richardson and his family of killers, understand this channel is not for everyone. It is only for the bravest souls, those who dare to uncover the truth behind America's most unsettling mysteries. If you possess the courage to hear stories few channels will tell, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. This account will make you question everything you believed about faith and trust. What transpired over those 11 years on the Kansas prairie would become one of the most systematically hidden crimes in American history. And tonight, you will learn why the federal government wanted this story buried forever. The year was 1871. The Kansas frontier remained raw with possibility and danger. 60 miles to the southwest lay Dodge City, a lawless cattle town where gunshots marked Saturday nights like church bells on Sunday mornings. But 30 miles northeast of Dodge, in a fertile valley where Crooked Creek wound through endless grassland, a different kind of settlement was taking root. The New Eden Christian community occupied nearly 2,000 acres of prime farmland, purchased with what seemed to be substantial investment from the east. Unlike the rough-hewn homesteads scattered across the prairie, New Eden boasted impressive wooden structures, a grand meeting hall with stained glass windows shipped from Chicago, multiple dormitory buildings housing dozens of families, workshops for blacksmithing and carpentry, and most striking of all, the prophet's house. A 3-story Victorian mansion that appeared impossibly grand for the Kansas wilderness. Prophet Isaiah Richardson arrived in Kansas in the spring of 1871 with his wife, Elder Sarah Richardson, and their 23-year-old son, Joshua. Isaiah stood tall and commanding, with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight into a person's soul. His voice carried the authority of one who had communed with the divine, deep and resonant, capable of making grown men weep with conviction or tremble with fear. Sarah, his wife of 26 years, wielded a different kind of power, the quiet, watchful intelligence of someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing. She managed the community's daily operations with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. Their son, Joshua, combined his father's physical presence with his mother's calculating mind. He served as the community's enforcer, and the one who welcomed new families to this promised land. The Richardsons preached a unique doctrine called divine simplicity. They believed true Christians must abandon worldly possessions and live in communal harmony, sharing all resources for God's greater glory. They promised arriving families a life free from frontier struggles, no more failed crops, no fear of Indian raids, no winter starvation. In return, families would contribute all they owned to the community treasury and submit to Prophet Isaiah's spiritual guidance. By the end of 1871, 14 families had joined. By 1872, there were 28. By 1874, New Eden reached a stable population of 35 families, roughly 175 souls living in what seemed like perfect Christian harmony. Each family brought their life savings, livestock, tools, and, most importantly, their unquestioning faith in Prophet Isaiah's divine mission. The community thrived with remarkable prosperity. Gardens yielded abundant vegetables despite Kansas' harsh climate. Workshops produced exceptional furniture and tools sold in distant markets. Children attended school 6 days a week, learning reading, arithmetic, music, and art. Evening meals in the Great Hall were times of fellowship and spiritual instruction, with Isaiah delivering sermons that spoke to the deepest human longings. But New Eden had rules, learned gradually. All outside correspondence required Elder Sarah's approval. Visits from relatives were discouraged; they might bring worldly corruption. And once families committed their goods to the treasury, leaving became complicated. Prophet Isaiah described visions of families who tried to leave, visions of failure, death, and damnation awaiting those who turned from God's call. What visitors did not see were the closed-door meetings in the prophet's house after evening meals. They didn't notice how certain families struggled with doubt, asking uncomfortable questions about finances or challenging Isaiah's absolute authority. And they certainly didn't realize that the beautiful gardens around the meeting hall, gardens Elder Sarah tended with devoted care, would one day hold secrets capable of shattering faith in humanity forever. The Richardson family had not come to Kansas to build a Christian community. They had come to perfect a system that would make them wealthy beyond imagination, all while hiding their crimes behind unassailable walls of religious devotion. The first murder occurred on a bitter February night in 1872, 10 months after the Miller family arrived. But to grasp the true horror, we must first understand how meticulously the Richardsons had planned every detail of their unholy enterprise. Herman Miller had grown restless. The education promised for his children mainly involved memorizing Bible passages and learning trades that benefited the community, not preparing them for independent lives. More troubling, Herman had begun questioning the community's finances. He had contributed $400 in valuable livestock to the treasury, yet when he asked Elder Sarah about winter coats for his children, she said the community couldn't afford such luxuries. That February evening, Herman approached Prophet Isaiah after dinner. Other families settled into evening routines, unaware they were about to witness the beginning of a pattern that would claim 9 families over 11 years. "Brother Isaiah," Herman said, his voice tight. "I've been thinking about our contribution, $400 plus livestock and tools, more than some men see in 5 years. Yet my wife says we can't afford coats for the children." Isaiah's reaction was swift. His blue eyes flashed with what seemed like righteous anger, though Joshua, watching from across the hall, recognized it as the cold fury of a predator whose prey had revealed dangerous intelligence. The confrontation escalated. Herman grew more insistent about accountability. Isaiah grew more offended by this worldly thinking. Finally, Isaiah raised his hand. "Brother Herman, I see the devil has been whispering in your ear. Come to my house after evening prayers. We will seek divine guidance together." At 10 that night, Herman walked through snow to the prophet's house, expecting a private discussion. Joshua met him at the door, explaining his father waited in the study, a comfortable room lined with religious books, warmed by a fireplace. What happened next would repeat, with variations, 8 more times over the coming decade. "Brother Herman," Isaiah began gently, "I understand your worries. But God has shown me something remarkable about your family's future, a special mission that will bring great glory to His name." As Isaiah spoke, Herman noticed Joshua had entered and stood behind him. Something in the younger man's posture sparked unease. But before Herman could turn fully, Joshua's powerful hands were around his throat. The struggle was brief but violent. Herman was strong, hardened by frontier life, but no match for Joshua's calculated brutality. Within minutes, Herman's body lay still on the study floor, his neck broken with professional efficiency. The Richardsons had practiced this technique before Kansas, perfecting killing without obvious wounds or excessive blood. They had prepared for every aspect of what they called the harvest. While Joshua disposed of Herman's body in a prepared pit behind the house, Isaiah and Sarah went to the Miller family's quarters. They woke Ruth Miller with gentle voices, explaining Herman had suffered a heart attack during prayer and passed peacefully into God's arms. 3 days after Herman's murder, the Miller family supposedly departed for California before dawn. Prophet Isaiah explained Ruth had received a divine vision calling them to missionary work among gold miners, and Joshua had escorted them to the railroad station in Dodge City. Of course, the Millers never left New Eden alive. That cold February morning, Ruth Miller and her 4 children joined Herman in what would become Elder Sarah's memorial garden. Their deaths were swift, poison in their morning coffee, administered by Sarah with the same gentle care she showed in all her duties. By the time New Eden awakened, the Millers' belongings had been sorted and stored. Valuables would be sold in distant towns, their savings added to the Richardsons' growing treasury, their bodies buried where Elder Sarah would create the community's first memorial garden, a beautiful flower bed where the faithful could remember departed loved ones and pray for missionaries in distant lands. The other families mourned the Millers' departure and prayed for their success in California. They had no idea they were praying over their graves. The months after the Millers' disappearance established a terrifyingly routine pattern. The community entered mourning and reflection. Prophet Isaiah delivered increasingly powerful sermons about sacrifice, divine calling, and earthly attachment's temporary nature. Remaining families drew closer, comforted by shared faith and trust in the Richardsons' guidance. The beauty of the system was its careful pacing. Eliminating families too frequently would breed suspicion. So they spaced their activities strategically, focusing between murders on recruiting, managing legitimate prosperity, and identifying next victims through psychological observation. New families kept arriving through 1872 and 1873, drawn by stories of New Eden's success spreading through Midwest church networks. The community maintained a stable population of 35 families, new arrivals replacing those called to missionary service or leaving for legitimate reasons. Thomas Hartwell and his family arrived from Ohio in spring 1873, bringing substantial savings and 2 teenage sons skilled as craftsmen. Thomas had been a schoolteacher, his intellectual curiosity valuable for managing New Eden's education programs. But by autumn 1873, Thomas began asking uncomfortable questions about record-keeping and financial accountability, making him dangerous to Richardson control. On November 15, 1873, Thomas suffered a sudden illness during evening prayers. He collapsed in the meeting hall, writhing before falling still. Elder Sarah, with extensive knowledge of medicinal plants from the Kansas prairie, had added a careful dose of water hemlock to Thomas's evening tea. The community mourned. Prophet Isaiah received another divine vision. God revealed Thomas's widow, Mary, and their sons were called to missionary work among Scandinavian immigrants in Minnesota Territory. 3 days after Thomas's funeral, the surviving Hartwells supposedly departed. Like the Millers, they never left New Eden alive. Their bodies joined the growing collection in the memorial garden, their worldly goods swelled the Richardsons' treasury, their deaths explained by divine mission. The Kowalski family arrived from Illinois in 1874, Polish immigrants skilled in metalwork. But Stefan Kowalski possessed an old-world skepticism about religious authority, making him question Isaiah's absolute control over finances. In February 1875, the Kowalski family perished in a tragic accident. Their quarters caught fire during a winter storm. According to Joshua's tearful account, he tried to rescue them, but the fire spread too quickly. Elder Peterson joined in 1875 with banking experience useful for managing New Eden's complex finances. But by early 1876, Peterson noticed discrepancies between the community's supposed poverty and its actual expenditures. During a severe prairie storm in May 1876, Elder Peterson was struck by lightning while working fields. His widow and daughter soon received a divine calling to missionary work among railroad crews in Colorado. Each elimination taught the Richardsons new lessons. They varied techniques, accidents, illness, divine callings separating families from resources before elimination. They also learned to maintain detailed records of victims' assets, dangerous but necessary for converting stolen property into wealth through distant sales. By 1870 SIX's end, 4 families had been eliminated. The Richardsons' private treasury held nearly $50,000 in cash plus valuable property and livestock. More importantly, they had perfected their system, identifying problematic families, manipulating religious devotion to maintain control, eliminating threats while preserving their reputation as devoted Christian leaders. The remaining members had no suspicion they lived alongside a carefully constructed death trap. Most families lived peaceful, productive lives for years. They saw only the Richardsons' apparent devotion, the community's prosperity, and inspiring examples of faithful families accepting God's call to carry the gospel to dangerous places. When letters arrived asking about missing relatives, Elder Sarah's responses were masterpieces of religious rhetoric and believable explanation. When officials inquired about land or taxes, Prophet Isaiah's documentation was meticulous, his legal compliance flawless. The years 1877 through 1880 marked increasing confidence for the Richardsons, but also growing danger as success attracted unwanted attention. They had eliminated 4 families without suspicion, accumulated substantial wealth, and established New Eden as one of Kansas' most prosperous religious communities. But success made them bold. Boldness would lead to risks exposing their crimes. The Brennan family arrived from Missouri in April 1877, fleeing debts that destroyed their farm. Patrick Brennan was an Irish Catholic who converted to Protestantism after marrying Margaret, alienating him from extended family back east. The Brennans brought 6 children and nearly $700 in savings, their entire life's work. Patrick possessed one quality incompatible with the Richardson system: he was a natural investigator. His Catholic background taught wariness of religious authority. Financial ruin made him skeptical of promises too good to be true. By winter 1877, Patrick asked uncomfortable questions about families who supposedly departed for missionary work. "Brother Isaiah," Patrick said one evening after prayers, "I've been wondering about those families. In 3 years, I've never received a single letter from any, despite writing several. Don't missionaries usually correspond with supporting communities?" Isaiah's response was immediate. "Brother Patrick, I'm troubled by your lack of faith in God's mysterious ways. Families called to frontier missions often find themselves too isolated and busy for regular correspondence. We must trust they fulfill God's will even unseen." But Patrick's questions grew more specific. Why sudden departures? Why vague destinations? Why no records of missionary activities to share with supporting churches? The Richardsons' solution was their most audacious yet. In March 1878, they staged a miraculous divine intervention. During evening prayers, Prophet Isaiah collapsed, writhing on the meeting hall floor in apparent supernatural agony. Sarah and Joshua rushed to him as the community watched in horror. After nearly an hour, Isaiah rose, face radiant with revelation. In a trembling voice, he announced God showed him terrible danger threatening New Eden. Satan had sent agents to infiltrate and destroy it from within by spreading doubt. Patrick Brennan, identified as Satan's primary agent, faced a choice: submit completely to Isaiah's authority or be expelled to face the prairie alone. Margaret, terrified by supernatural events and desperate to protect her children, begged Patrick to apologize and renew his faith. Patrick's capitulation was heartbreaking. He publicly confessed sins, admitted Satan corrupted his thoughts with doubt, and pledged absolute obedience. But the Richardsons never intended Patrick to live. His questions were too intelligent, his skepticism too dangerous, his influence too significant. On April 20, 1878, Patrick died in his sleep, apparently of a heart attack from spiritual stress. Margaret and her 6 children, devastated and convinced Patrick's doubts caused divine punishment, readily accepted Isaiah's revelation. They were called to missionary work among Irish immigrants in Colorado mining camps, their loss making them powerful witnesses for religious obedience. The Brennans' departure followed the established pattern, except their elimination gave the Richardsons their largest single haul, $700 cash plus valuable property sold discreetly. 2 more families fell between 1879 and 1881. The Schmidts, German immigrants who questioned lack of contact with Lutheran churches, died in a food poisoning incident affecting only their household. The Caldwells met their end in 1881 when Patriarch William Caldwell's drinking led to indiscreet comments about missing families. But the Caldwell elimination would ultimately bring down the Richardson enterprise, because it included a victim too young to be manipulated and too intelligent to accept explanations satisfying traumatized adults. 16-year-old Emma Caldwell had grown up on the frontier, where death was frequent and children learned early to observe adult behavior carefully. Emma's investigation began after her mother's natural death from consumption in late 1880. She noticed Elder Sarah asked specific questions about her mother's family back east. Did they write regularly? Would they expect to hear soon? How much did they know of family plans in Kansas? Helping Sarah sort her mother's belongings, Emma noticed Sarah set aside all correspondence and family records. These documents will be important when God calls your family to missionary service, Sarah explained, speaking as if such calling was already determined. Emma began noticing patterns. Families chosen for elimination always questioned community policies or possessed resources, making elimination particularly profitable. More disturbing, she discovered a hidden storage room beneath the prophet's house containing personal belongings from families who supposedly departed but left behind precious possessions. In January 1881, Emma made a desperate decision. She wrote detailed letters describing observations and suspicions, addressed to the Dodge City Sheriff, the federal marshal in Wichita, and her mother's brother in Illinois. But before she could mail them, Elder Sarah discovered her activities. The Caldwell elimination in February 1881 followed the pattern. But Emma's attempt to expose truth planted the first seeds of fear in the Richardsons' minds. For the first time in their murderous enterprise, they faced possible discovery and punishment. Growing paranoia after Emma's investigation led to their first serious mistakes in nearly a decade of perfect murders. Emma's exposure failed, but her intelligence and determination showed how vulnerable their system was to a victim smart enough to recognize patterns and brave enough to seek outside help. The Caldwell elimination marked the beginning of the end, though they didn't realize it. Emma's death was necessary, but her final words, shouted as Joshua cornered her against a cliff face, would haunt Sarah for months. I wrote 3 letters. They're already mailed. Everyone will know what you've done here. Emma had been lying. The letters were hidden in her clothing, never reaching any post office or official. But her bluff achieved what no other victim had. It planted genuine fear about outside investigation. This fear led to decisions ultimately exposing their crimes. First, they accelerated their timeline for leaving Kansas, planning to liquidate assets and relocate to California before investigation. Second, they eliminated evidence more aggressively, burning documents and items previously preserved as trophies. Most fatally, they decided to eliminate one final family before departure, the Hoffmans, recent German immigrants with substantial savings and knowledge of homeland banking systems valuable for establishing new identities in California. But the Hoffman elimination in June 1882 differed, motivated by greed, not necessity, planned hastily, not with careful preparation. Klaus Hoffmann had been a successful Prussian merchant before immigrating to Kansas with wife Greta and 3 teenage children. He sold European business interests for a substantial sum, converting wealth into American currency and bonds for establishing a new trading operation in the American West. The Hoffmans' arrival represented the Richardsons' largest financial opportunity ever. But Klaus was also their most sophisticated victim. His international banking experience made him naturally suspicious of New Eden's financial arrangements. His knowledge of German immigrant communities meant his disappearance more likely triggered outside investigation. Desperation to acquire Hoffman assets before departure made them abandon usual patience. Instead of months evaluating Klaus's psychology, they acted within weeks of arrival. This haste led to their first serious operational error in a decade. On June 15, 1882, they attempted to eliminate Klaus using their standard technique, private spiritual consultation in the prophet's house study. But Klaus had been suspicious since arrival. He told Greta to expect his return by midnight and alert others if he failed to appear. When Joshua tried to overpower Klaus, he met unexpected resistance. Klaus was younger, stronger, and prepared for violence. The struggle was loud and prolonged, noise heard throughout the house, risking investigation by others. Worse, Klaus wounded Joshua with a letter opener before being killed, creating a blood trail and obvious violent signs unexplainable as natural death. For the first time in their criminal careers, the Richardsons faced explaining obvious murder evidence to community members awakened by struggle sounds. Their solution was audacious but self-destructive. Next morning, Prophet Isaiah announced Klaus had been possessed by demonic forces during consultation, requiring violent exorcism resulting in the demon's departure and Klaus's peaceful death. This satisfied traumatized community members but created first cracks in Richardson's reputation for divine authority and peaceful leadership. Greta Hoffman and her children, devastated and terrified by supernatural explanations, readily accepted Isaiah's revelation. They were called to return to Germany as missionaries. Their departure was scheduled for early July to catch a ship from New York. But the Hoffmans never left Kansas alive. And their elimination on July 3, 1882, was witnessed by someone the Richardsons never considered a threat: 8-year-old Timothy Weber, son of one of New Eden's most devoted families, hiding in the prophet's house barn during hide-and-seek when murders occurred. Timothy saw Joshua loading bodies into a wagon and heard Sarah giving burial instructions for the memorial garden. The child was too young to understand fully but old enough to realize the Hoffmans weren't traveling to Germany as announced. Timothy's innocent questions to his parents about why the Hoffmans were buried in the garden created the first serious crack in Richardson's control over information. When Timothy's father, Elder Weber, approached Isaiah with his son's confused report, he received explanations increasingly strained and inconsistent. For the first time in 11 years, a New Eden member began seriously questioning official explanations for mysterious deaths and sudden departures. Elder Weber's growing suspicions combined with Timothy's eyewitness account created an internal threat the Richardsons had never faced. Just when everything seems to be coming to a head in this terrifying tale of New Eden, I want to pause. If this story gives you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit like to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. The truth about what happened next is even more shocking than what we've uncovered so far. Let's discover together how this house of horrors finally came crashing down. The Richardsons were about to learn that their decade of perfect murders had finally created a witness they could not eliminate without destroying the community providing cover for their crimes. The investigation exposing Richardson's crimes began not with law enforcement, but with a persistent mother, Catherine Brennan McKenna, older sister of Patrick Brennan, murdered in 1878. Catherine lived in St. Louis, where her husband, Michael McKenna, worked as a federal customs inspector. Unlike most relatives of New Eden victims, Catherine possessed resources and government connections to pursue thorough investigation into her brother's disappearance. Catherine had been troubled by complete lack of communication from Patrick's family since their supposed departure for Colorado missionary work in April 1878. Patrick had been a faithful correspondent throughout adult life, writing regularly even during difficult farming struggles. His silence after joining New Eden seemed entirely out of character, especially with 6 children whose lives Catherine expected him to share through letters. Spring 1882, Catherine convinced Michael to use federal connections for official inquiries about Brennan whereabouts. Michael contacted federal Indian agents in Colorado Territory, railroad companies handling passenger traffic to mining regions, and Catholic missionary organizations working among Irish immigrants in Western territories. Results were disturbing. No record existed of any Brennan family engaging in missionary activities in Colorado or elsewhere during specified periods. Armed with this, Catherine and Michael traveled to Kansas in August 1882, determined to visit New Eden and demand answers. Their investigation would have proceeded differently had they announced arrival. But fortunately for justice, they approached unannounced, hoping to observe normal operations before revealing purpose. What Catherine and Michael observed during 3-day reconnaissance was a community prosperous and well-organized but strangely tense and secretive. They positioned themselves on hills overlooking settlement, using Michael's military field glasses to study daily routines. What they saw raised immediate questions. Buildings were well maintained and recently expanded, suggesting significant financial resources inconsistent with struggling religious settlement dependent on donations. Expensive farm equipment sat in workshops. Livestock quality indicated substantial agricultural investment requiring more capital than 35 frontier families could provide. More disturbing were behavioral patterns. During evening gatherings visible through meeting hall windows, people demonstrated almost frantic enthusiasm for religious activities, as if performing devotion, not expressing genuine spiritual joy. Children appeared subdued and watchful, exhibiting hyper-alert behavior Catherine recognized from immigrants fleeing religious persecution in Ireland. Most significantly, they witnessed something confirming worst suspicions. On third morning of observation, they saw Elder Weber approach Prophet Isaiah with urgent concerns, accompanied by young Timothy. The conversation was clearly agitated, Isaiah's commanding demeanor giving way to obvious anxiety and defensive gestures. That evening, Catherine and Michael approached New Eden openly, presenting themselves as Patrick Brennan's relatives, demanding to speak with leaders about his family's location. Their arrival stirred activity confirming suspicions. This was not a community accustomed to unexpected visitors or comfortable with outside scrutiny. Prophet Isaiah met them in Meeting Hall, flanked by Sarah and Joshua. His initial response was smooth. The Brennans had departed for missionary work in Colorado, doing excellent work among Irish miners in remote mountain valleys. He produced letters supposedly written by Patrick describing successful ministry and plans for permanent mission station in isolated location. But Catherine had spent 40 years reading her brother's correspondence. She knew his handwriting and style. The letters Isaiah showed were obvious forgeries. Handwriting was similar but not identical, language formal and religious in ways Patrick never used personally. Most damning, letters contained incorrect geographical references, describing mining operations where none existed. These letters were not written by my brother, Catherine stated flatly, Irish temper showing. Patrick would never describe Colorado Rockies as having gentle valleys suitable for farming. He served in Colorado Territory during the war. He knew those mountains were harsh and dangerous. The confrontation revealed first serious cracks in Richardson's carefully constructed facade. Isaiah's religious authority meant nothing to Catherine, raised Irish Catholic questioning Protestant ministers. Michael's federal credentials made dismissing concerns or intimidating them impossible. Most importantly, their announced intention to report New Eden to territorial authorities meant Richardsons couldn't simply make them disappear like previous troublemakers. The breakthrough came when Michael, using federal investigator training, asked specific questions about New Eden's legal status and financial operations. How was land ownership documented? What records existed of property transfers for families donating to Treasury? Where were tax records territorial law required for large agricultural operations? Isaiah's responses were evasive. Community finances managed through divine guidance, not earthly record-keeping. Legal documentation unnecessary for families transcending worldly concerns, tax obligations handled through special arrangements with territorial authorities outsiders couldn't understand. These answers confirmed Michael's suspicions New Eden operated outside legal boundaries suggesting criminal activity. As federal customs inspector, He had extensive experience recognizing financial fraud and property crime. Community's obvious prosperity combined with lack of legitimate documentation for resources suggested systematic theft on massive scale. But it was 8-year-old Timothy Weber who provided evidence finally exposing crimes. During heated adult discussion, Timothy approached his father and whispered something, turning Elder Weber's face pale with shock. Reluctantly, Weber shared his son's information, and truth about New Eden began emerging. Timothy had seen Hoffman's burial in Memorial Garden, contradicting official story of departure for Germany. More importantly, his innocent questions led Elder Weber to examine Garden more carefully, revealing disturbing soil inconsistencies and unusual flower arrangements suggesting systematic burial of multiple bodies over years. That night, Catherine and Michael decided to finally bring justice to New Eden victims. Instead of confronting Richardson's further, they quietly departed for Dodge City, where Michael's federal credentials let them request official investigation by territorial marshals. They carried Timothy's eyewitness testimony, Elder Weber's garden observations, and evidence of systematic financial fraud justifying federal intervention. The Richardsons watched McKennis leave with growing panic, realizing their perfect system faced most serious threat ever. For first time in 11 years of successful murders, they faced federal investigation with resources and legal authority to expose crimes. Federal investigation of New Eden began September 10, 1882, when Deputy U.S. Marshal James Crawford arrived with warrants to examine financial records and interview residents about missing persons reports filed by relatives in multiple states. Crawford was accompanied by Territorial Attorney, Federal Land Office Inspector, and 2 Ford County Deputy Sheriffs. They also brought something Richardson's never encountered, legal authority transcending religious claims and community autonomy. First day at New Eden, investigators found community in grip of carefully controlled panic. Richardson's had spent previous 3 weeks preparing for possibility, coaching community members on responses to official questions, hiding or destroying evidence revealing crime scope. But they had made fatal error, ultimately exposing everything. Overconfidence led them to keep detailed records of victims' property and possessions, believing these proved legitimate business transactions, not systematic murder. Marshal Crawford's discovery of hidden vault beneath Prophet's house was almost anticlimactic. After hours examining suspicious financial records and interviewing terrified community members, the vault contained personal belongings from 9 families, carefully catalogued and stored with criminal efficiency, family photographs, personal Bibles, children's toys, wedding rings, and most damning, identity documents proving these families never left New Eden alive. But physical evidence finally breaking case was Elder Sarah's memorial garden, beautiful flower beds where she spent 11 years tending blooms above victims' graves. Investigators began excavating garden based on Timothy's testimony and his father's observations. They uncovered carefully organized cemetery containing remains of 47 men, women, and children buried in family groups with personal possessions, arranged with same meticulous attention characterizing all Richardson criminal activities. The Richardsons' arrest was swift and absolute. Prophet Isaiah, Elder Sarah, and Joshua were charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder, plus fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Surviving New Eden members, traumatized by revelation they had lived above mass grave for years, provided testimony painting horrifying picture of systematic manipulation, religious abuse, and calculated murder. Their trial became one of Kansas territorial history's most sensational criminal cases, attracting nationwide newspaper coverage and sparking congressional debates about federal oversight of religious communities. Evidence revealed not only crime scope but sophisticated psychological techniques used to maintain victim control and conceal activities. Prosecution, led by Territorial Attorney William Harrison, built case methodically around 3 devastating evidence categories: physical proof of murders in Garden, documentary evidence of systematic theft in Vault, testimony from traumatized survivors revealing psychological manipulation for control. Physical evidence was overwhelming. Coroner examinations of 47 bodies showed consistent death pattern demolishing accidental mortality or natural causes possibilities. Men showed strangulation or blunt force trauma signs, women and children exhibited poisoning evidence, bone samples containing water hemlock traces and other toxic plants Sarah cultivated in hidden garden sections for horrifying purposes. Documentary evidence in Vault told equally damning systematic financial crime story. Richardson's kept meticulous victims' asset records, tracking cash savings to livestock values to personal property sold in distant markets. Records showed family accumulated over $150,000 cash and convertible assets in 11 years, a fortune worth millions today. Most damaging to defense was survivors' testimony, particularly Elder Weber and Timothy, whose innocent observations triggered investigation. Their accounts revealed community where religious devotion weaponized to ensure absolute obedience, where questioning authority portrayed as spiritual rebellion worthy of divine punishment. Elder Weber's testimony was devastating. "We trusted them completely," he said, voice breaking, describing years witnessing suspicious disappearances. "When families vanished overnight, we accepted explanations because we believed Prophet Isaiah spoke with God's voice. We were told doubt was devil's work, questioning divine revelation same as questioning God himself. We were fools. Our foolishness cost innocent people their lives." Defense argued Richardson suffered religious delusions making them legally insane. This strategy collapsed when prosecutors revealed meticulous planning and calculated execution characterizing crimes. No mentally incompetent individuals could maintain such sophisticated operations 11 years, managing complex financial records, manipulating government inspections, coordinating 9 families' elimination without earlier discovery evidence. Prophet Isaiah's own testimony proved final nail in family's legal coffin. Convinced even during trial he possessed divine authority, Isaiah attempted justifying actions by claiming God revealed which families worthy of salvation, which destined for destruction. His complete lack of remorse combined with detailed knowledge of each elimination demonstrated premeditation level, making death penalty inevitable under Kansas territorial law. Jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts against all 3 defendants. Prophet Isaiah Richardson, Elder Sarah Richardson, and Joshua Richardson were sentenced to death by hanging, executions scheduled November 15, 1882, exactly 9 years after Thomas Hartwell became second victim. Executions occurred simultaneously on 3 gallows erected in Dodge City Town Square, witnessed by nearly 1,500 people traveling across Kansas and neighboring territories to see justice served for one of American frontier history's most heinous crimes. Local newspapers reported all 3 went to deaths, maintaining divine authority claims, Isaiah's final words predicting God would vindicate their actions and punish opponents. Aftermath had profound implications extending far beyond Richardson's punishment. Federal government implemented new oversight requirements for isolated religious communities, mandating regular inspections and financial audits, making similar crimes harder to conceal. Congressional investigators used case as evidence for stronger territorial law enforcement need, leading to expanded federal marshal services and improved communication systems for tracking missing persons across state and territorial boundaries. Surviving New Eden members faced difficult task rebuilding lives after years of psychological manipulation and trauma. Most returned to original home states, aided by federal compensation payments funded through sale of Richardson's stolen assets. Several survivors required ongoing medical care for what era physicians diagnosed as nervous exhaustion, modern psychology would recognize as severe PTSD. Catherine Brennan McKenna, whose persistent investigation triggered New Eden crimes discovery, became celebrated figure in newspaper case accounts. She used public platform to advocate improved federal oversight of religious communities and better protection for families seeking refuge in isolated settlements. Her efforts contributed to legislation requiring territorial authorities maintain regular contact with religious communities and investigate missing persons reports with federal resources. New Eden physical site was abandoned immediately after trials, territorial authorities declaring land unsuitable for future settlement due to mass murder association. Local folklore claimed property cursed. Several attempts establishing new settlements failed due to mysterious accidents and unexplained difficulties. Buildings gradually fell to ruin. By early 1900s, only foundation stones and carefully tended gardens remained where Elder Sarah hid victims' graves. Modern historians studying New Eden Massacre consider it one of 19th-century America's most sophisticated criminal enterprises, remarkable not only for scope and duration but psychological techniques Richardson's used maintaining operation. Criminal psychologists identify case as early example organized criminal activity disguised as religious authority, establishing patterns unfortunately repeated in various forms throughout American history. New Eden story serves chilling reminder how religious devotion can be manipulated by those understanding human psychology and exploiting natural human need for community and spiritual guidance. It demonstrates how isolation and authority can control victims so completely they participate in own destruction, believing until end they serve divine purpose rather than feed family of calculating killers. Perhaps most disturbing, Richardson's crimes reveal how easily community becomes complicit in systematic evil when evil presented as religious duty and spiritual necessity. Families dying at New Eden were not naive or foolish. They were faithful Christians seeking better lives for children, people whose trust and devotion weaponized against them by individuals understanding exactly how to exploit deepest human needs for meaning, belonging, and divine purpose. The 9 families perishing on Kansas prairie between 1872 and 1882, Millers, Hartwells, Kowalskis, Petersons, Brennans, Hoffmans, Schmidts, Caldwells, and one final family name lost to history, represent more than statistical tragedy. They represent ultimate faith betrayal, religious community corruption, and terrible price paid when absolute power meets absolute evil in isolated spaces where civilization's protective eyes cannot see. This mystery shows greatest evil often comes not from obvious monsters, but from those presenting themselves as servants of light while serving only own dark appetites for power and wealth. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything revealed about Richardson's crimes? Or could more victims exist whose disappearances never connected to New Eden? Leave comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. Truth about human evil often more terrifying than any supernatural horror. More stories like this wait to be told. See you in next video.